Welcome to another round of economic updates provided by SC Securities. To start off today's presentation, let me first brief you on the most recent policy measures adopted by the central bank and look at its impact on a more broader perspective. Now, starting with the policy interest rates, and the statutory reserve ratio was reduced to the lowest level in history. The statutory reserve ratio, which was around 8%, was subsequently reduced at several stages, and it was reduced to the lowest level of 2%. And we've seen in the most recent policy review meeting, it again been increased to 4%. So 2% to 4% increase when compared to the historic norms is still benign as far as the investment climate is concerned. And the policy rates also, you can see that the policy rates have been high as around 8% and 10%. And even despite the recent hike, it is yet at a benign level around 5% and 6%. Now, so the policy interest rates, as I mentioned before, and the statutory reserve ratio was reduced to a historic lows, and thereby the central bank provided ample liquidity to the market at reduced and concessional interest rates. Furthermore, liquidity injections were allowed to remain in the money market without being absorbed by the central bank in order to expedite the credit flows. In the meantime, the central bank also provided the required financing to the government to overcome fiscal stress arising from the shortfall in government revenue and increase in expenditure. So the current fiscal and monetary policy also contributed towards this shortfall in government revenue. Consequently, the central bank holding in government securities have increased from around 75 billion in January 2020 to a staggering level of 1.3 trillion by October. Yeah, 1,336 billion or 1.3 trillion by 1st October 2021. Looking at the inflation rates also have increased from around 3.7% early in the year to reach 6.8%, the National Consumer Price Index. And it is now above the average weighted fixed deposit rate. Now, despite the recent uptick in policy rates by the central bank, it still remains one of the most accommodative rates in the history. However, it is inevitable that in the short run that these policy rates can be increased to overcome inflationary pressure and increase in the government securities portfolio held by the central bank. But yet, we are of the opinion any potential increase would not impact the investment climate in the country, and it would remain still conducive for investments compared to the historic norms what we have seen. Now, COVID-19 has resulted in the country's GDP per capita to shrink by 4.4% year on year, while inflation and unemployment has risen. But yet, if you look at the inflation numbers, the current inflation level of around 6.8% is far below what we have experienced in the past. There were situations where the inflation rates were around 25%, but since around 2009, Sri Lanka has managed to keep the inflation numbers to a single-digit level. Then looking at the unemployment rate also, you could see that there is a little spike in the unemployment rate, but yet compared to historic norms, we have not still reached those levels. Nuan?
Thanks, Shaita. So one of the key issues that seem to plague the Sri Lankan economy is actually its foreign reserves. And these said reserves actually still remain in somewhat of a precarious position. So if we look at Sri Lanka's forex reserves, they were actually boosted up by 26% to 3.55 billion recently, thanks to an IMF SDR allocation that came online last month. Despite this, the country still has another $1.5 billion worth of international sovereign bonds or ISB payment coming online next year. So these actually have been highlighted. So we have our first payment coming online on the 18th of January and our second one coming on the 25th of July. Actually, these ISB payments remain priority, and boosting our reserves, our forex reserves, remains a key issue. Because settling these loans, if there is a failure to settle these loans and a potential default or debt restructuring were to result, this would actually yield a higher rate of interest or lower credit ratings amongst borrowers further down the line. So this remains a primary prerogative for the government to actually address. Furthermore, on top of these ISP payments, we also have further payments towards the World Bank and Asian Development Bank, which amounts to somewhere close to 14.6 billion US dollars. So now if we take a breakdown of the structure of the loans for the Asian Development Bank, we can see that the portfolio has primarily comprised of projects and technical assistance funding. So overall, it has lent somewhere close to 13 billion US dollars, with sector focuses being transport and energy. And if we look at the entire portfolio, 85.76% of the portfolio makes up for project and technical assistance, whilst the remainder is actually based on trade and supply chain finance and microfinance. Similarly, if we now look at the World Bank figure, this is 1.68 billion US dollars, but these are the summation of the IBRD and IDA loans over the last 5 years. So if we look at this, they have financed a plethora of projects such as water, sanitation, school infrastructure, and road development, among other aspects. Now, if we look at IBRD loans, these are International Bank for Reconstruction and Development loans, and IDA is International Development Association loans. So in terms of these two loan structures, these are actually given at very concessionary rates and given at huge payback periods with small increments and installments, regular installments. So the real focus for the Sri Lankan government still seems to be repaying those ISP loans moving down the line. Furthermore, something that has also plagued the Sri Lankan economy has been its trade balance deficit. Despite strenuous efforts of the government in 2020 with huge import restrictions, we are still running a trade deficit of around just over 6 billion. To compound this, the pandemic, along with excessive quantitative easing that the government has undertaken to help stressed industries, it has exacerbated in the country's balance of payments already worsening. Charita, over to you.
Right. Now, a key hindrance that continues to happen to the country is the recovery efforts, is the depreciation of the LKR. Now, we have seen the currency depreciating for the longest period. And one of the major contributing factors for this has been the string of failed bond auctions that have occurred with the price ceiling. The result has been that the central bank having to absorb the unsold quantum by printing more money on the backdrop of further quantitative easing. So if one have followed the central bank, the daily operations, you could have seen that this happening. So the graph to your right hand side depicts the amount of government securities held by the central bank. So from around 75 billion, as mentioned earlier, it had increased to a staggering level of 1.3 trillion. However, in the meantime, the overnight liquidity in the banking system also have dried up, and making its way for the policy rates to be increased. So now coming back, this has been mitigated to some extent by the central bank removing the price ceiling and alleviating some of the pressure and reducing the burden of the CBSL having to buy more government securities. And looking at the external sector, mainly focusing on two of the forex earners, namely tourism and worker remittances. In the tourism industry, we saw that the tourism earnings from the tourism sector dipping 17.7% in 2019, mainly due to the Easter Sunday attack. And it got further exacerbated in 2020 with COVID-19 setting in, and 2020, the results, earnings have dropped by around 81%. We expect this sector to recover towards end of 2021 and mainly in 2022, and maybe to the level which was not seen before. And looking at the workers' remittances, we have seen that the workers' remittances have been on a declining trend from 2016 to 2019, and all of a sudden in 2020 there was a sharp increase. So this increase in 2020 is mainly because of the compensation payments that workers received who are returning back home after job terminations, especially in the Middle East. So that also would improve, but yet we would expect in 2021 a small dip from the numbers what we have seen in 2020.
In terms of a road to salvation or a possible way out, is that what we believe what this country should do, and in particular the government should do, is engage in a robust vaccination drive and increase strenuous efforts into rebounding the tourism sector, which will be one of the main forex earners for the country moving down the line. So if we look at it, a mass vaccination drive with a target of 80% of the population inoculated is the one feasible way for the government to achieve any semblance of normalcy again. But one positive that we can highlight from this is that compared to the regional peers, Sri Lanka has actually engaged in a very successful vaccination program. Overall, we have 68% of the population that have been vaccinated with at least one jab against COVID-19, with 55% of that 68% being fully vaccinated. This actually ranks as one of the better statistics in comparison to most of the peers in the region. What does that mean? It means that we can now start opening our borders up and actually encouraging tourism to come back, with the fact that other countries around the world, especially in Europe and in the America, in USA, actually opening up its borders. This is also highlighted in this slide. So now when it comes to tourism, we actually have timed this in a very positive way, in the sense that if we look at most of the vaccination drive for the top 10 inbound tourist markets for Sri Lanka, we can see that the United States of America, 55%, the UK, 66%. These are some of the major inbound tourism markets for Sri Lanka. Now, even though India only has an 18% statistic for its vaccination drive, that 18% is in comparison to its total population. So that 18% still represents a very significant number. So what does Sri Lanka need to do? It needs to, like we mentioned before, engage in a very robust vaccination drive and make sure that they come onto the green list of these markets. Now, we've already seen that happening. The UK, just a couple of weeks ago, moved Sri Lanka to its green list. Furthermore, we have seen now Australia from the 1st of November opening up its borders. The US has also decided to open up its borders to the UK and the EU, and it is touted that down the line very soon that they will also be opening up its borders to the rest of the world. So this is actually the one true way that we see that Sri Lanka can come out of it, given that tourism has been such a huge forex earner for the country. But how do we consolidate that sector that has reaped so much benefit for us in the past? We believe that a potential introduction of a gaming operations in Sri Lanka could further boost or bolster the tourism earning potential. So now if we look at the plug and place model of Macau, it has been touted as the gambling capital of Asia. In 2019, the industry brought in into China more than 39 million visitors and generated up to 42 billion US dollars. Now, in no way are we saying that we can replicate that model of Macau. That is something that has been in place since the 60s and 70s and has grown organically. But what we can take advantage of is that in recent times, we have seen that the government of China have started placing stricter regulations with regards to gaming operations. And we actually have seen some gaming operators moving away from that market. So what we need to do is maximize on that scenario and actually create or cultivate an environment where they can come and set up a gaming operations in Sri Lanka. We have actually seen already two countries really benefit from this, and that is Vietnam and Singapore. Vietnam actually legalized gaming operations in 2017. They have already seen a huge uptick in tourism earnings. So prior to the legalization of gaming operations, we saw the tourist arrivals grow at a CAGR or compounded annual growth rate of 15%. But just in the 3 years since they introduced gaming operations, we've seen it grown at a CAGR of 18%. We have seen in 2019 alone, we took 2019 as the base year because that was the last year before the pandemic actually properly set in, that the 8 established casinos amassed a generation of 58 million US dollars. Alternatively, Singapore opened its doors to casinos in 2010. And since that time, from 2009-10 onwards, up till 2019, we have seen tourist arrivals grow at a CAGR of around 7%. And in 2019 alone, the earnings from that industry came in at 1.9 billion US dollars. So this is definitely a model that Sri Lanka can genuinely replicate, and to some success as well. And of course, the other project that does seem to have a lot of hope riding on it is, of course, the Port City project. It is set to commence its operations in the latter part of this year and will bring about some much needed optimism for the economy. We have already seen that it will generate a 15 billion US dollar investment. Once completed in 2041, we will potentially see 11 billion US dollars added to the annual GDP of the country. It'll create 130,000 plus new jobs. So this project already, the Colombo International Finance Center, a mixed development project, is expected to be completed by 2021. And that is the overall phase one, where we see an office tower, 2 residential towers, and a retail podium, plus 2 office towers, as well as a retail podium coming up online by 2025. So this will generate some much needed Forex earnings. Furthermore, eventually, what we do need to also stress is that what this pandemic has highlighted is that we are somewhat heavily skewed towards certain industries. So if you look at our top 3 Forex earners, it has been workers' remittances, apparel exports, and tourism, all 3 which were hit in some way or the other by the pandemic. Eventually, what Sri Lanka does need to do is it needs to create a framework where it encapsulates further Forex earning industries so that we are not so heavily reliant on 3 major components that can be impacted by future potential pandemic related instances. Yes, and with that, we conclude our presentation. And in conclusion, I also want to say is that finish this presentation off is that whilst the pandemic has had dire consequences on the Sri Lankan economy, it hasn't been as bad as we had or expected. And we have seen that the pickup is now happening. The main issue that still arises with the Sri Lankan economy is the rate at which that pickup can happen. So if they were to implement a combination of some of these policies that we have highlighted here in this presentation, we may genuinely see a huge pickup and a faster pickup, and some return to normalcy or even economic growth much quicker down the line. Thank you. We open the floor to any questions pertaining to this. So yeah, we'll take a few questions if there are.